Every year for as long as I can remember, the White House Correspondents, the White House press corps, throws a very gaudy, sleazy, glitzy party for itself. And they throw it for themselves at the White House. And it's traditionally attended by the president, by all the top members of the administration. Donald Trump refused to attend one of the years, to his credit. But it's a tradition in Washington, and every year that goes by, it gets gaudier and more ostentatious and sleazier. It's designed essentially to allow these journalists, these media personalities, to get to pretend that they're celebrities attending their Oscars, the Washington version of Oscars. They have B-list and C-list celebrities who come, they pose with them on the red carpet. And their massive corporations pay for tables, and they now start having after parties. They have the Axios party and the Politico after party. Just like the Oscars, it's all designed to enable these people to feel like they are integrated, elevated members of the royal court, getting to dress up in their finery, having the New York Times write about the outfits that they're wearing. I was watching a documentary over the weekend about the journalist at the local newspaper Newsday, which is located on Long Island. It's been a great local paper for a long time. They have, I think, something like 20 Pulitzers over the last 30 years for just doing the kind of shoelace reporting that local newspapers have always been known for. And they featured this one journalist in particular who was obsessed with documenting the mafia and the gangsters who ran the mafia in places like Ozone Park in Queens and various neighborhoods in Brooklyn. And he's now deceased, but they showed pictures of him and video of him, and he was this very overweight guy. He wore these very unkempt clothes. He couldn't even close the neck on his collar. He was very unkempt. He just worked in the newsroom, and he was just this like outsider guy, this working class guy. It was a working class profession. They relied on guilds and unions in order to secure their benefits. And the people who went into journalism, for the most part, the ethos of journalism was that they were working class people who wanted to take American elites down as many notches as they could. It was an actual adversarial relationship between the press and the government. Now, I don't want to romanticize that. There's been a long time of great deference from the national media toward government, but the ethos of journalism was that these people were supposed to be outsiders. And one of the things that changed most in American journalism is that these newspapers and news outlets went from being locally owned by families who considered it almost like a public trust to everything becoming corporatized. So the major networks, the major cable outlets all started being eaten up by these major corporate conglomerates. And so ABC and CNN and CBS and MSNBC and the New York Times and the Washington Post, these all became just units in corporate conglomerates, like any other unit, like the insurance unit or the financing unit, just the entertainment unit. And it was all run the same way through the same mindset. And the people who thrive in corporations and major corporations are radically different than the people who thrive in local newspapers. These are not outsiders at all. The ethos of a corporation is to meld as much as possible into the corporate machinery. And because these corporations have so much business with the government, the last thing they want is any real animosity between their media outlets and the government they supposedly cover. And the kind of people who thrive and who get attracted to these positions on the national level and who are hired from them are now all graduates of Harvard and Yale. They're not graduates of community college or working class people at all. They're the kinds of people who could easily be working for the government. They just chose instead to work in the media department of this machine, of which they're very much a part. And the relationship with the government is one of servitude. We were just demonstrating how willingly they lie, how often they disseminate disinformation that advances the interests of the American government. And so this festival, this pageant, this disgusting spectacle that they have every year, where they dress up and go to the White House and pose on red carpets and give speeches heralding themselves, and the president stands up and talks about how much he loves the media, because of course he would. Why wouldn't he? And he hugs all the people who get awards from all these media outlets that serve his agenda. As nauseating it is to watch, and it is nauseating, it also has a great value, which is it's very revealing of the actual relationship between these servants of the royal court. That's really what it looks like. It's the White House, and Washington is a royal court run by the members of political royalty. And they invite in, behind the walls of Versailles, whoever serves the interest of the king. And that is their propagandists, their spokespeople, who get to go and dress up and be treated like honored guests of the king because they are part of the royal court. And they're so proud of that. They're so fulfilled by it that they're embraced by the very people they're supposed to be impeding. The New York Times covered this event as exactly what it was intended to be, as some kind of chic event where people dressed up and you had to talk about which designers were putting the costumes on which journalists. And here's what the New York Times said on April 27th, quote, "It hasn't been the nerd prom for a while." That's what they used to very self-effacingly call it. Oh, it's the nerd prom. But the New York Times says it hasn't been the nerd prom for a while. Once a popular target of jokes about bad fashion, and not just from the evening's featured comedian host, the White House Correspondents Association dinner has morphed in recent years into a less campy, more staid prelude to the Met Gala, which take place only days later. It's only fitting, really, given the subtext of journalists being jailed around the world. Somehow the fact that journalists are being jailed around the world means that American corporate journalists with their pedicures and their manicures have to dress up in Armani tuxedos and Versace gowns and go pose at the red carpet with celebrities while they hug the president and are so grateful to see Karine Jean-Pierre and the White House Chief of Staff. Quote, "Still, the bar for serious style has been raised by the mix of media, political, and Hollywood figures that populate the guest list. Not that it's just the celebs off fate with stylists and designer brands who are working the entrances. This year's headliner, President Biden, has such a propensity for aviators that his accessories have practically become part of his political platform. He even turned them into material for his stand-up routine at last year's dinner. Hello, Dark Brandon." I don't know if we have here is a photo, one of the photos that the New York Times featured in an article entitled "Who Had the Best Red Carpet Appearances?" But here is Vice President Kamala Harris, and she is wearing Celine. Let's pull this up. So that's Vice President Kamala Harris. She's wearing Celine. And then this person next to her, his name is Eugene Daniels. He's a White House correspondent for Politico. And there you see him in his little finery as well. This is the relationship between the press corps and the top officials in the Biden White House. Now, here is the head of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, Kelly O'Donnell, who is a senior correspondent with NBC News, and she decided to pay tribute to important journalists around the world who are being unjustly detained. And just like the press corps is so angry at Russia's treatment of its dissidents, but will never mention the imprisonment of Julian Assange, so too will the press corps pay tribute to the journalists being detained by the bad countries, the official enemies of the United States, without ever once mentioning a journalist infinitely more consequential than every person in that room combined who's being imprisoned and killed by Joe Biden. They can't mention him because they cannot displease the king. Otherwise, they will lose their access to the royal court. So listen to them and their self-importance, acting like they're courageous because they're denouncing foreign governments on the other side of the world that the U.S. government has told them to hate.
At the Wall Street Journal, they are counting. For Moscow correspondent Evan Gerskovich, 396 days since he was jailed in Russia. The U.S. government has designated Evan as wrongfully detained. And Evan's parents and his family are with us tonight, and we are with you always.
Could you even remotely conceive of the very possibility that standing next to Joe Biden, who's just a few feet away on the dais, that they would mention the journalist who Joe Biden himself is prosecuting and killing, Julian Assange? It's inconceivable that they would even mention Julian Assange or Gonzalo Lira, let alone stand in applause and pay tribute to the injustice of the imprisonment of that journalist. Even though Julian Assange, as I said, is responsible for more major stories over the last 15 years than all of these royal court servants combined. But they are servants of the U.S. government, so of course the last thing they're going to do is mention a journalist who's being imprisoned, not one of the bad countries. Oh, we're going to so bravely stand and denounce Vladimir Putin, and next we're going to so bravely stand and denounce Bashar al-Assad in Syria, but we would never, ever utter a word about the persecution by the U.S. government of our own dissidents.
We remember Austin Tice, 4,276 days, nearly 12 years since he was kidnapped in Syria. His mother, Deborah, is with us. And Mrs. Tice, we are with you. And Mr. President, again, we humbly ask that you do everything you can to bring them home.
Oh, yeah, we humbly ask you, Mr. President, to do everything you can to bring them home. But what about the journalist who is actually being prosecuted by that same person? Why aren't you humbly asking that Joe Biden end his prosecution and release him from prison, as even our allies in Australia are demanding? These people are complete cowards. Everything about them, their branding, everything are completely fraudulent. There's not an iota of adversarial energy between these people and these government leaders, and that's why they can all go and dress up at a gala inside the White House where President Biden is appearing and feel grateful for it. I mean, I couldn't imagine going to something like this and then having to look at myself in the mirror afterward, that I got dressed up and gussied up to go as an invited guest in the White House, where I embrace and greet and hug White House officials, the people I'm supposedly supposed to be such adversaries of, and then call yourself a journalist? Here's the rest of this.
Our profession can be perilous. Since October, about 100 journalists have been killed, most of those deaths in Gaza, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. Around the world, more than 320 reporters imprisoned as of December, including an American with dual Russian citizenship, Alsu Kermayshev, who works for the U.S.-funded Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty. She has been jailed in Russia since October.
I mean, do you see? They say things that are authorized by the U.S. government to say. You are free to denounce foreign governments as long as those governments are enemies of the United States. Here is the award that they gave out. They put Lester Holt up there, the very distinguished baritone from NBC, the NBC anchor, to give out the award for greatest, best, whatever, White House correspondent. And here's who they chose.
Each year, a panel of independent judges reviews dozens of entries for the 5 major WHCA Journalism Awards. It's my honor to announce this year's winners. The Aldo Beckman Award for Overall Excellence in White House Coverage, named for a former association president, the late Chicago Tribune correspondent Aldo Beckman, goes to Barak Ravid of Axios. The judges said Barak Ravid's reporting displayed deep, almost intimate levels of sourcing in the United States and abroad that produced stories closely aligned to the events that subsequently transpired. His stories put the reader into the room as decisions were being made in the tumultuous aftermath of the October 7th Hamas-led raids on Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, the WHCA is pleased to give the Aldo Beckman Award to Barak Ravid.
Barak Ravid is an Israeli, not an American. He was born in Israel. He's a citizen of Israel. He served in the Israeli Defense Forces. In fact, he was in the reserves of the Israeli Defense Forces as recently as a year ago. Here, in fact, is a tweet where he announced that in protest of the decision by the Netanyahu government to eliminate the right of judicial review by the Supreme Court, quote, I have just notified my commanders that after the events of tonight, I will be not reporting to reserve service anymore. So as of a year ago, he was a member of the Israeli Defense Forces. And basically all that he's done since October 7th is write down and report what the Israeli government and the U.S. government have told him to say. Which is why they say, oh, he brings you into the room of the U.S. and Israeli governments. Because he's obviously trusted by the Israeli government. He was in the IDF as recently as last year as a reserve. And the Biden White House loves him as well, and so chooses him to bring forth their messaging. And that's what he's been doing since October 7th. It's been incredibly blatant. The year before, or 2 years earlier, they gave this award, the best White House correspondent, to Matt Visor of the Washington Post, who wrote one article after the next about how gentle of a man Joe Biden is, about the role of ice cream in his life. He would write like Hallmark cards about Joe Biden in the Washington Post, and that's who ended up winning the best correspondent dinner, because this is an award for the best servant of the royal court. This is what this is. It's a Versailles party run by Marie Antoinette, where they get to come into the wall and basically be embraced by the government for their good service. And the person who wins the award, let's put that video back up there. The person who wins the award is the person who does the greatest service for the government. Now, here's what happens when Barak Ravid comes out like some Oscar winner, all giggly and all giddy. And watch what happens when he goes over to President Obama, the government official whom he serves. Look at that, they're sharing a private moment. They're continuing to clasp hands. Of course, Joe Biden loves Barak Ravid. He loves everybody in this room. They work for him. That's why they're invited there. And just watch how prolonged this affectionate exchange is. Joe Biden did a little gesture because he didn't know that he was supposed to turn and face the cameras, and for some reason they found that uproariously funny, and they all began laughing together at this incredibly affectionate scene. Now here he is with Kamala, who also is heaping praise on him while she sits next to that Politico reporter dressed in his little blue Star Trek suit. I mean, this is sleaze of the highest order. And obviously, the more they do these things, the more the public sees what they are and who they are, and the more the public hates them, despises them. Like the people of Paris despise the people of Versailles for walling themselves off and giving them all kinds of prizes and awards and heralding their greatness and dressing up in the finest finery while the rabble were kept outside. That's exactly what this is. But the fact that these are journalists whose branding is that they have an adversarial relationship with these people, that they are there to expose their secrets, to hold them accountable, is an absolute repugnant joke. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.